in the dry heat of a lonely western town where the wind carried whispers of forgotten dreams and the sun burned the earth into shades of gold and brown. A man named Thomas lived alone on his sprawling but quiet ranch, a man hardened by years of solitude, weather, and the long silence of an empty home. For though he had acres of fertile land, strong horses and cattle that filled his barns, he carried inside a hollow ache that no harvest nor wealth could fill, the ache of having no family to greet him at dawn, no gentle laughter to break the monotony of his long evenings. And so his days became repetitive, filled with work that tired his body but left his heart restless, until one fateful evening, in town when he rode in for supplies, and saw a scene that would change the course of his life forever. A drunken man slouched by the saloon doors, his face red from too much whiskey, his voice loud and cruel as he tugged roughly at the wrist of a fragile young girl, no more than 16 or 17, her eyes wide and distant, her clothes torn from neglect, and her silence piercing amid the noise of the rowdy street. For though the man shouted at her, cursed at her, even shook her by the shoulders, she made no sound, only stared ahead as though her soul had retreated somewhere far away. And the townsfolk, hardened to such cruelty, passed by with little more than a glance. For in these parts, poverty and desperation were common sights, and children often bore the brunt of their parents' downfall. But Thomas stopped in his tracks, his weathered hand tightening on the reins of his horse, his chest tightening with anger and pity, for something in the girl's silence reached deep inside him, echoing the silence of his own ranch, though hers was born not of choice but of pain. And as the drunkard barked at the crowd, "She's useless, can't hear a damn thing, won't answer, won't speak, nothing but a burden. Who'll take her off my hands, eh? Who'll give me coin for this worthless mouth?" The laughter of cruel men rang out, mocking the helpless child. And yet Thomas did not laugh. Instead, he dismounted slowly, each step deliberate, his boots stirring dust as he approached the man, his voice steady, low, but carrying a weight that silenced even the jeering crowd. "How much?" he asked, his eyes never leaving the frightened girl's face, and the drunkard blinked, then sneered, smelling opportunity. "You want her, rancher? She ain't good for nothing. Can't hear, can't cook right, can't speak a word, but if you got money, I'll sell her to you now. Better she be your problem than mine." And Thomas, without hesitation, reached into his coat and pulled out a handful of coins, more than enough to buy supplies for weeks, but in that moment worth far less to him than the quiet dignity of the girl's trembling hands. And the man's greedy eyes lit up as he snatched the money, shoving the girl toward Thomas, who caught her gently before she stumbled, steadying her with strong arms. And for the first time in years, Thomas felt a flicker of warmth in his chest, a protective fire awakening. And as he led her away, whispers followed them, some calling him a fool, others murmuring that he was kind. But Thomas paid them no mind, for all he could think of was the girl beside him, silent, wide-eyed, as though she couldn't believe she had been saved from her father's cruelty. And when they reached his horse, he helped her mount before swinging up behind her, the sky glowing orange as the sun dipped low, and the ride back to the ranch was quiet, save for the rhythmic pounding of hooves. But in that quiet, Thomas began to feel something shift inside him, a sense of purpose, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he was no longer destined to live out his days in solitude. When they reached the ranch, he guided her into the small but sturdy farmhouse, showing her the kitchen, the sitting room, the warm fire crackling in the hearth. And though she said nothing, her eyes moved across the space with wonder, as if she had never known such safety. And Thomas, unsure how to speak to her, finally knelt down to meet her gaze, speaking softly. "You're safe here, you hear? Nobody will hurt you again." Though the words seemed bitterly ironic to him, for she could not hear, yet somehow as his lips formed the promise, her eyes softened, a tear sliding down her cheek, as if she understood not the words but the intent behind them. And Thomas, awkward in comfort, handed her a blanket and gestured to the small bedroom he had prepared, once meant for the family he never had. And as she lay down that night, still silent, still withdrawn, Thomas sat by the fire staring into the flames, feeling both heavy with responsibility and strangely light with hope, for he had brought someone into his life who needed him, and in that need he found his own loneliness easing. Days passed. The girl, whom he learned was named Emily, remained quiet, speaking no words, reacting to nothing, her silence like a wall, and Thomas accepted it, never pressing her. instead showing patience, leaving food for her, teaching her with gentle gestures how to feed the horses, how to carry pails of water, how to gather eggs, and though she never responded with words, she followed carefully, watching his hands, his lips, his movements, and soon she began to mimic him, learning quickly. Her silence no longer cold but filled with attention, and Thomas marveled at her strength, the way she endured with quiet dignity. But what astonished him most came one evening, when he was fixing a fence by the pasture and cut, his hand on the wire, muttering under his breath with frustration, when suddenly Emily, who had been watching, gasped softly, a sound so faint he almost missed it, and turned her head sharply toward him, her eyes wide with worry. And in that moment Thomas froze. For if she was truly deaf as her father had claimed, how had she reacted to his voice, to his muttered pain? A suspicion bloomed in his mind, wild and improbable, yet impossible to ignore. And over the next days he began to test it, speaking softly when her back was turned, whispering her name in the quiet of the barn. And though she never admitted it, though she never spoke, he saw it, the slight twitch of her head, the flicker of her eyes, the way she responded to certain tones, as if her world was not entirely silent but muffled, faint, fragile like a candle struggling against the wind. And Thomas's heart raced with the realization that Emily was not truly deaf. Not completely, that buried beneath the cruelty of her father's neglect was a girl who could hear more than anyone had ever cared to notice. And with that discovery came a fire within him, a determination not only to protect her, but to help her discover her voice, her strength, her worth. And as the stars blanketed the ranch that night, Thomas whispered into the darkness, his voice carrying both promise and prayer. "You're not broken, Emily, you're just waiting for someone to listen." And though she lay silently in her room, her hand rested over her heart as if the faintest echo of his words had reached her, and perhaps for the first time in her life, she believed she was not alone. So the ranch that once echoed with silence now held the beginnings of something fragile but beautiful. And Thomas knew this was only the start of a story neither of them could yet understand. But he also knew one thing for certain, that every soul watching, listening, and following this journey carries within them the power to change another's life with kindness, patience, and love. So if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more than just stories, we share reminders of hope, courage, and the belief that even in the loneliest places, miracles can begin with compassion.